Welcome to ThinkTech, raising awareness about technology, energy, globalism, and diversification. As part of the ThinkTech series, this show is Global Connections, and I'm your host, Carlos Juarez. I'm delighted to be joined today by Kelly Ratana from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and she's a Fulbright Scholar here in Hawaii, where she's completing a master's degree in marine science. Looking forward to a conversation because one of the key things to understand about Fulbright, this is a flagship international exchange program that helps bring some of the best and brightest from all over the world to the U.S. And conversely, many American students and scholars have opportunities to do exchanges abroad. And so the opportunity is one that really turns them into cultural ambassadors. And as we'll see in learning with Kelly, she is effectively a cultural ambassador. You may not think of yourself as that, but today we're going to be talking about some of her experience, what has brought her here, what she's been doing here in Hawaii over the past year. And I want to just remind everybody that we do broadcast live on the internet at 2 and at 4 every weekday. All of our shows are streamed on ustream.tv and on Spreaker.com. If you want the links to those, please go to our website, thinktechhawaii.com. And if you care to join us here in the downtown studio gallery for any of our shows, write to Jay, that's Jay, at thinktechhawaii.com. So we're joined again today by Kelly Ratana. And Kelly, I wonder if you might just start giving us a quick snapshot. You are here in Hawaii now for the past year, but you come to us from another island. Tell us a little bit about your what brought you here, where you're from.
Kia ora, and thank you for having me, Carlos. It's lovely to be here. I am from New Zealand. I don't think of it as an island, but I guess it is. We have two major islands.
Yeah.
I came to Hawaii in particular because as a science graduate, I've always battled with trying to combine my culture into my work. Mm-hmm. And I saw Hawaii in particular and its similarities in cultural heritage to my own as an opportunity to include that in my marine science master's program.
Excellent. Oh, and so gosh, I think it's going to be a great opportunity to understand because, as you noted, I mean, there are some interesting similarities between New Zealand and a place like Hawaii, and yet obviously some differences. I'm curious, maybe to speak briefly about this Fulbright, because you know this is a very important, prestigious award that you have that helps make possible your coming to Hawaii. Fulbright is the flagship international exchange program, and it's been in existence since the late 1940s. Mm-hmm. So every year we bring and host here in the U.S. Scholars like yourself, and vice versa. We have Americans who will then go abroad. Tell me, how did you come to learn about the program itself? You were a student down there, and what was it that called it to your attention?
I actually had never heard of this program, the Fulbright program, as an undergrad. Mm-hmm. I did a postgraduate diploma and I still hadn't heard of it. Mm-hmm. And then one of my uncles who has connections in some high up circles sent me an email. I was on his email list and it showed up, and basically I saw that you could study, get your master's or PhD abroad and anywhere in America. And so I thought, well, why not? I want to travel. And I've thought about pursuing higher education, so I applied, and I didn't think that I was going to get it, but I did, so here I am.
Well, no, and I'm very grateful that you've come here, and I want to congratulate you because it is also something that does open up for you opportunities, and you become part of a larger network of Fulbright alumni. Mm-hmm. And as part of that, you come to the U.S., and while you're home based now and your institution is here in Hawaii at Hawaii Pacific University, the Fulbright actually brings you to some earlier workshops and orientations. Tell us a little bit about that. Did you come first to Hawaii, or did you go somewhere else?
Sure. I initially was brought over and went straight to Jackson, Mississippi in the South. That was for an orientation gateway program through Fulbright, mm-hmm. and there was 70 countries represented and 140 or so of us there. Mm-hmm. So it was a very diverse group, and that was my sort of baptism by fire into Fulbright.
Welcome to Jackson.
Yeah. Jackson itself was a bit of a ghost town. Mm-hmm. We didn't see many people, but once we got to JSU, the state university, that was where everybody was at. Yeah. So I had a great time there. It was definitely an experience. I wish I had a little bit more time in Jackson to get to know a little bit more about the South, but I mean, what little time I did spend there was great.
Yeah, and you said, so it brought together many of the new incoming Fulbrighters themselves, and from all over. I mean, what were some of the highlights? I mean, you met people, suddenly you were in this like global community, but in the middle of the Deep South, Jackson, Mississippi.
I actually made some really good friends from Mexico.
Oh, great.
It was the first time I had spent any time talking to people whose first language was Spanish. I found it really difficult to understand them sometimes. Just the way that they speak English. The English was fine, but the sort of the accent on it was interesting to get used to.
Yes.
I mean, lots of people from other parts of Latin America. I met a girl from Madagascar. There was lots of European countries there as well, quite a few African countries, and the Middle East as well, which was neat. So it was a really diverse group, and just I'm not very good at small talk in those kind of situations, so I didn't meet everybody. I couldn't meet everybody in 4 days, but the people that I met were an amazing group of people, and I'm still in contact with a lot of them.
Excellent. Yeah, so you began a relationship that I know will continue in many cases, and part of that is designed to kind of help, in effect, to kind of orient you to, I don't know, life in the U.S. or you know what it means to be a Fulbright scholar. And
both of those things. They talked about Senator Fulbright and what he went through to establish the program, which was really neat. They gave us sort of a what to expect rundown. It was a southern take on it, and you know, I found myself often wondering whether Hawaii would be the same. And in my experience, Hawaii is very, very different from mainland America. I mean, the South is different from the East Coast, different from the West Coast in America anyway, but I find myself relating to Hawaii a little bit more than I did when in my experiences on mainland America.
Excellent. So shortly after that, you find yourself trekking back, almost homeward bound, but finding yourself in the middle of the Pacific here in Hawaii. And as you said earlier, I mean, you were sparked by thinking that Hawaii might be a place that could help you either understand or you know, maybe get a deeper sense of how to connect your interest in science, but also with issues maybe related more to culture and maybe even the natural environment. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your interest? I mean, you're in a marine science program, but beyond that, what specifically do you take an interest in?
So a lot of my work at home before I came to the States was around freshwater management, and I was working within an iwi or a tribal organization. And so I mean, inherently being an Indigenous person, being Maori from New Zealand, I carry with me my culture wherever I go and in whatever I think about. And so it's always been important to me to include that in my thinking when it comes to science, even though traditionally cultural, or the word culture in a scientific realm, is kind of frowned upon. So coming to Hawaii, I was initially and still am interested in land management, freshwater resources, environmental sustainability, all of those kinds of things. And for me, I think the marine environment interests me to no end, but it is more like my fun time playground. My working background is sort of, I haven't got a lot of experience working in the field, but that's where my interest lies in freshwater and watershed sort of based stuff. But they are all linked. So.
No, and you know, again, studying the sciences, the whole interconnectedness and well, the things that you can't see it separate. And I like how you put it, where one of the challenges, quite often science tries to remove issues of maybe social, cultural, political, as if it's all just very scientific, but nonetheless can't help but divorce it from the context, right? The social, political, cultural, and you looked at Hawaii, and obviously it sparked your interest. I mean, what was some of your either knowledge about Hawaii, or what were the perceptions, or what image did you have before you found yourself here?
So, from what I'd heard from family members who had traveled or just watching TV, there's two sides to Hawaii, and that was the native Hawaiian community and their culture and their practices and the way that they lived their lives. And then there was the very touristy side of it, which is sort of downtown Waikiki. And so from what I knew before, being here now, I see that is actually the case. There is quite a separation between the extreme sort of touristic centre in Waikiki that you have versus Waianae Coast versus Waimanalo Town, sort of places like that, where people are still just trying to live their lives in their land, and so I find that really interesting.
No, very real, and I can imagine, and I would look forward to learning more from, your own home country there, New Zealand, Aotearoa, as it's referred to in the Maori language as well. It's got to have a similar mixture. You have a clash of, if you will, of the Western, Europeans who came there, and the indigenous culture that's always been there and has deeper roots. Do you find some, I'm sure you do, but you see some clear parallels in that mixture, but otherwise some other differences? I'm curious if you might reflect on that. What's similar and what's different?
Yeah, the similarities that I see are our sort of worldview, the way that we look at ourselves as a part of the environment, that we are not owners of land, we are kaitiaki or guardians of the land, and waterways and all of those kind of things. And something that a difference, maybe more so a historical difference in the sort of colonization process. So I used to think that the same thing happened here in Hawaii, that there was, I know that there was missionaries and everything, but that missionaries came and that we all signed a document that said we were happy to be together now. And I know that that's an oversimplification of the situation both in New Zealand and in Hawaii, but when I first got here, a native Hawaiian person that I was in contact with told me that there was sort of
didn't work out that way.
Not quite that simple here, and that there is some feelings of occupation, maybe is the word that he used, and so that was really interesting and a difference that I saw. And I've heard people speak and say that often Hawaiian or some outside people or some other people think that there are similarities between that colonization process that went on in the two places, but Hawaii has its own unique history. So that was something that really struck me. We have the treaty to fall back on, and we use it. Maori as a people are able to use that as a tool to better themselves, whereas here in Hawaii there's not really anything that I know of, and I'm not claiming to know everything, but there's nothing that I know of that helps them to do what they want to do and live their lives the way they want to.
Yeah, no, it is clearly the history is a very different one, and again, I certainly am not the expert on the history. I have had a chance to visit New Zealand, and yet my sense is that what you described, the treaty, is it what's the
Treaty of Waitangi?
Waitangi, obviously was one, again, maybe the oversimplified version is that the European colonizers were not quite able to conquer and completely dominate in a sense. They had to work out a compromise, a treaty that effectively guaranteed and ensured some rights for the indigenous populations, and that probably helped to foster what is more of a partnership of sorts. I don't know if that's the right word, to be honest, but somehow maybe a somewhat more even or partnership of sorts, whereas here we don't see that in the same way, right? Yeah, absolutely. Tell me briefly, I mean, you obviously your home country is also part of this larger Pacific Island region, and so on one hand, the indigenous culture that you have there as well has a certain set of values that I think you suggested already are somewhat similar. You described it as maybe perhaps how we would value the land or see it as what are other aspects of the culture that you see kind of parallel?
Something that I've noticed is we use a lot of the language is similar. Like a lot of people don't know where New Zealand is, and two, definitely don't know what being Maori is or what Maori is. And so I have to explain to them often that we're an indigenous culture of New Zealand, and then they're like, oh, so what's your culture like? I'm like, well, we're part of the Polynesian Triangle, and our culture and our language can be traced through the islands, and you can see similarities through all of the islands, from Hawaii to Tahiti to Samoa, Tonga, Fiji. All of those places have similar wording, and so while Hawaiians use owls a lot, and the Okina, we use Ks and Rs. So something as simple as aloha is aroha in Māori, and they both mean love. So very similar language, and I think just the nature of people, the mentality that first and foremost you look after your guests before yourself. All of those kind of things really remind me of how people are at home.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think it reflects, again, the rather deeply entrenched, the embedded nature of that culture. And for anybody who comes to Hawaii, you've got to know there is that bubble of the tourists that you described earlier, but the, let's say, the culture here that is part of this indigenous heritage, it is that, it's values that are reflected, and we do see very much important to understand. Well, let me suggest that we're going to take a short break, because we've got to take a break for our sponsors to say a few words. I want to remind those listening, this is Global Connections in the ThinkTech radio series. I'm Carlos Juarez, and we're joined today by Kelly Ratana, who's from New Zealand, Aotearoa. I'm very excited to learn more about her story and her own observations. The show not only brings people like you with different ideas, but help you reflect on what you see here, because as we'll speak again in a moment, the Fulbright experience is something you will take with you as a cultural ambassador, and we'll talk more about that. So we'll be back in just a few minutes. Stay tuned for more in the story.
Aloha, my name is Dan Bauer, and I'm the General Manager of the Plaza Club. The Plaza Club is Honolulu's premier business club. We're located in the heart of the financial district on historic Fort Street Mall. On the 20th and 21st floors atop the Pioneer Plaza, our commanding skyline views, along with our award-winning cuisine and service, are known as the place to do business downtown. We offer professional as well as social events and programs to our members and their guests, all tailored to enrich their professional and personal lives, and to give them the cutting edge that they deserve in business. Why don't you consider becoming a member of the club? Call me at 531-7788, or come see me and let's talk business and how the Plaza Club can work for you. Again, my name is Dan Bauer. I'm the General Manager of the club, and I'm here for you.
Aloha, we're back and we're live, and this is ThinkTech, part of the Global Connections show in the ThinkTech radio series. We're talking here with Kelly Ratana from New Zealand. I'm Carlos Juarez, your host. And so, Kelly, we were just talking a little bit about, obviously, some parallels, some of the similarities between the Maori culture that you come from in New Zealand and what you've come to learn about Hawaiian culture. There are clearly parallels. You've spoken to us about some of them. Anything you could share about, I don't know, very differences? I mean, you talked briefly about maybe the history, the experience, but beyond that, maybe in terms of the culture itself, do you see more parallels or do you see any differences?
Not any major differences that I can think of. I mean, obviously the Hawaiian community has adapted and their culture has adapted to being on the land here, whereas the land in New Zealand is completely different. We have a lot more land, for instance. We've had a lot more area to spread out into. Agriculture is huge in New Zealand. So I think more so than differences, there are similarities within the cultural context.
Oh, excellent. Well, let me turn to talk a little more about, again, your own area of interest. You've come and you're focusing on marine science. You described a little bit more the focus on freshwater management, and this is an area that's so vital, especially for island countries and cultures where you face the challenge of, how do you have a sustainable livelihood? And we here in Hawaii, we're dependent on so much to come from outside as other places would. I mean, what are some of the specific issues? I mean, challenges? Are there things that you've come here that you're learning about, or that you're even maybe coming to share about what's done in your home country?
So in terms of my research?
Yeah, in this area, particularly specifically like freshwater management. I mean, what goes on? Are there certain strategies or techniques that you're learning more about, or?
Like I said, I haven't had a lot of experience working in the freshwater sort of world. It's somewhere where my interests lie, and when I return home, I hope to be able to get into that area and help, my people in New Zealand better manage our resources. My work here at Hawaii Pacific University is focused around the stream mouth estuaries. So that interface between the marine environment and the upstream wetlands and land. And I think I found here in Hawaii that there is a lot of focus on the coral reefs, obviously. They're a very valuable resource, not only as a support for food for subsistence fishes, but for tourism as well. And there's also been a bit of work done upstream in the extreme freshwater habitats of the islands. But no one has spent a lot of time or invested a lot of time in these sort of small stream mouth estuaries where there is the interface, and so that's where the focus of my work has been or is at the moment. Things that I hope to bring from home for that in terms of my research is I'm doing a science master's obviously, but like I said, I want to involve my culture in that, and there has been a tool developed for the cultural assessment of waterways in New Zealand, and so that was developed by Maori scientists to give the cultural perspective on the health of a waterway. And so I'm hoping to use that tool here in Hawaii in terms of the stream mouth estuaries and document whether this is a feasible pathway for the cultural voice to be heard in terms of assessing the health or the integrity of these waterways.
And I'm curious on that point. I mean, in what way do you, I don't know if the right term would be operationalize it, or how do you somehow bring in the culture, let's say? I mean, because again, the science part I'm not a scientist, but I can kind of imagine you're studying, the sort of micro level things, but culture matters, and it matters in important ways. I mean, could you maybe illustrate how this gets brought into managing resources or dealing with, some of the challenges that you're studying?
I'm a bit of a novice in this field. I'm trying to find my way. This is, my master's, so I'm still working on it. For example, part of what I want to do is look at the differences in historical or living memory distributions of important food species or important endemic species in these stream mouth estuaries and compare that spatially to current distributions. And so if we can see that these important species were present in one or two of these estuaries in the past but are not there now, you can tell that, and you find out that information from the people who have lived on the land in those areas and have watched these systems change. And if you can find that out, that's one, a way to assess the health of the waterways or the integrity. You can see that these species are no longer present. And two, it is another way to set goals for restoration. If these species begin to return, because a lot of them are marine migrants as juveniles, so they're juvenile fish species coming into the estuary to utilize its protection and productivity. If they come into the estuaries that are healthy because they can select which one they're going to go into, then that's another way to set goals for restoration.
Oh, that's good, yeah.
So.
And I guess the other challenge that you, maybe getting back to this question of how culture might matter, I mean, I think too often you might have situations where those coming in with new ideas or different ways of doing things may not be sensitive or understand or be even able to communicate with the people who are there, whose livelihood may depend on that. And so what may work in one place may not easily work, or you have to be more aware, because again, when you talk about culture, it speaks to issues of what are values, what do people consider important, and how do you get them to embrace that. Very fascinating. And I'm curious, like, from your perspective, you have made clear you've got this Maori heritage, which is very important, and which, as anybody who understands New Zealand has to understand some of that. What does it mean? If you were asked that question for you, what does it mean to be Maori? Is that something you can answer?
Oh, not in a few words.
Yeah. But it's certainly something you have a certain, a sense of identity, a certain pride, a certain, either a shared destiny you have with your family, or, your...
Maybe versus a shared destiny, it's a shared cultural history. And definitely when I think about being Maori, or when someone asks me who I am or where I'm from, my answer is I'm Maori, and I'm Maori before I'm a Kiwi. Other New Zealanders are identified as Kiwis, and that's awesome. I love that people identify with our country, but being Maori is separate from that. And to me, being Maori is embracing and living the values of our tipuna or of our ancestors, such as manaki tangata, aroha, looking at our traditional management systems like tapu, which is similar to kapu here. We have management of resources through aspects of rahui, and so it's just a way of thinking and living and being in this world.
No, I think it's a very critical part, because it's something you obviously have had inculcated in you from your childhood. You see it in your family, and it's a way of connecting to where you're from, keeping you grounded. I think too often in a lot of our modern society, people, maybe a stereotype about Americans. You're Americans. Where are you from? Well, just not always a clear sense of what that means to have a certain heritage, and particularly on issues of the kinds that are interesting you now. You're studying about the marine environment or other areas related to that, but it helps you understand it from a different lens, from a different perspective, right? No, that's quite valuable. Now, we live in a world, and again, particularly relevant for island nations or societies, very challenging times of how do we foster sustainable means of production. Maybe I would turn to ask you, what, as far as what you can tell, what are some of the biggest challenges we face? Are they related to food security, or is it more in environmental issues? All of these matter, but in your mind, what are some of these biggest challenges?
I think the biggest challenge, and especially in Hawaii, from what I've seen, is balancing the environment with food security with economics and tourism. And the basis of the economy here in Hawaii is tourism, I believe. And so those are all intertwined. All of those things are intertwined, and there's no way to separate them out. And so I think the only way that you're going to get around that is to look at things in a more holistic manner, which is something that as Indigenous cultures we're used to doing. And so I think that I am a science major, and yes, I am a scientist, but I wear multiple hats, and sometimes at the same time. I do believe that is one of the challenges, and looking to these Indigenous cultures who are used to looking at their world in a holistic manner is where we need to start, or at least look at them versus dismissing them. So
no, I think and we hear this term sustainable development, and it's very real, and it's a very popular focus now in many areas, whether it's the academy or the energy companies and the like. But at the end of the day, when you look carefully, as you described, at many Indigenous cultures, it's not new. It's something that they've always done. And so in many ways, just looking back, taking a careful appreciation of that is so important for all of us to do. And even more so when you live in that culture or environment. I think it's fair to say almost any place you go, you need to appreciate that. Who are the people that have been there and understand that, and there's much to be gained. I wonder if for a moment we can turn. You are here. You're a scientist in the works and all, but this other part, as you even said a minute ago, you wear several hats, because I think we all do. You are on some level even a global citizen. You come here representing your culture, your country, your people, and this experience will impact you as it does for anybody else in immeasurable ways. You've got opportunities to meet new people. I want to talk about this notion of a cultural ambassador, because as you eventually make your way back, home, you will bring with you, a certain knowledge, things that you saw here, things that you can share. Have you thought about maybe some of the ways that you anticipate sharing some of what you gained here in this experience?
I think talking to people is the main thing that you learn how to do that as a Fulbrighter, as a cultural ambassador, as a global citizen. Whenever you're out and you meet people, you need to know how to communicate. And I had a real problem with that when I first got here. If someone would ask me where I was from, I'd say I'm Maori, and then they're like, what's Maori? And so I learned very quickly, and this might sound a bit selfish, but to pick those people, or to pick up on the people who are genuinely interested on it, and to explain to them, because otherwise I was getting really drained. And so I think learning those skills and being able to return home and do the same is to communicate with people effectively what the experience was. Other ways I see myself being able to share when I get home is talking to our tamariki o taiuhi, or our younger children and youth, and getting them interested in not only the Fulbright program, not only traveling, not only higher education, but just Hawaii in general, my experience in the States, and sharing with them what you can find out there in the world. And I think that's where the most important communication needs to be had, is to our younger generations.
Absolutely. No, it is that vital role, helping to mentor and give them inspiration, give them stories. And I think it's an exciting time we live in, because while you are physically disconnected, you're in a world now where a couple of clicks and you can connect with family back home on Skype, or even as you return, you've got colleagues and friends here and in other places that you'll have these opportunities that. And I always like to say too that it'll make a difference. The next time you're back in New Zealand and you will connect with somebody here, you actually know the world that they're part of, rather than some abstract remote thing. that can go a long way to helping break those barriers. And I was pleased to hear you describe, the sharing, because ultimately telling the story, talking it is how we communicate things. And something that always has intrigued me is New Zealand, a small country, but it has always had a population of people who always manage to find ways to get off that far remote place. And when they travel, perhaps you can correct me if I'm not wrong, but they go off for pretty long journeys sometimes. So they'll travel to Europe, they'll go to North America, other parts. Always that funny story, there's some accident that happens in a remote part of the Himalayas or in Africa. There's always one Australian and one New Zealand that are somehow there. Tell me a little bit about that tradition. It's part of the culture that somehow you have opportunities fairly young to kind of, not everybody does it, but many do. It's not uncommon to have.
I think, when I was a kid, I didn't think about traveling much. It wasn't until I was sort of a teenager and my parents took us to Australia for the first time. And that was kind of fun, and I was like, oh, there must be other places we can go. But even when I graduated from university, during university and during high school, I looked at overseas opportunities such as foreign exchange programs. So, it's constantly been sort of in my mind since maybe the end of high school that traveling was something that I wanted to do, to get out and have a look at everything. We are a small country, we are at the bottom of the world, we are isolated. And
could be the top of the world if you just turn it around, I guess.
And I love my country, don't get me wrong, there is no place like home and I miss it every day.
Yes.
But I think knowing that there is something else out there is part of sort of, if you're exposed to it, then you start to think about it. And New Zealanders are, Maori as well are explorers by nature. If we weren't explorers, we wouldn't be down there.
That's right.
We wouldn't have gone all the way to the bottom of the world. So.
Yes, very fascinating way to put it. The other thing I often note, and I wonder if this speaks home to you in some way, when you travel and see other places, you learn about them. You've come here, you've learned about this. You've been to Jackson, Mississippi. I think you mentioned as well, you told me there was a place in Arizona you went earlier this year. But not only do you learn about those places, you think more carefully about your home and how it either, what matters to you or what's important, so that travel teaches you about that, but it also teaches you about your own values more. Have you had any sense, have you thought more about why do they do things differently or in other places or things like that?
I think it's more made me reflect on how lucky I am to be from New Zealand and where I come from.
So it helps to kind of give you more appreciation for your world.
I think one thing that struck me, I went home in July, I was telling you earlier, I went home in July for a week, and as soon as I got off the plane, there was an overwhelming sense of home. Everybody sounded like me, everybody knew exactly what I was saying, everybody understood where I was coming from when I said what I said, and it was just so easy to be at home. But in saying that, it's been an amazing challenge and growth experience for me to be outside of my comfort zone, especially in a place where I may not appear to be very Maori. The traditional maybe picture of a Maori person you might think of is very similar to a native Hawaiian person, with brown skin, sort of broad features. And so when people see me, and they're like, oh, she's just a haole. And then they hear me and they're like, oh no wait, she's not from here.
You must be Australian, because that's the
what I get
thought,
all the time. You're from Australia, aren't you? No. And so it's been a growth experience learning how to cope with all of those different aspects of first impressions before I even get to explain myself.
Interesting. And you've described very well the whole language thing, because you have a different response based on, you said it earlier, do they seem like they really want to know, or do you want to just give them the quick answer so we can move on, and I'm from New Zealand, that's enough, down south somewhere. But otherwise, for those who do take a keener interest in, yourself, you're now obviously refining your cultural competency skills, learning, about other places and people. And I think at the end of the day, this is, again, the world that we're in, this global interconnectedness, to survive and to prosper and to really get the most out of it, you really need to take an interest in learning about other people's. And, we've got so much information and opportunity now, but ultimately it's about people. And indeed, the nature of this exchange program is really, it's a form of citizen diplomacy. You're coming, you're connecting, you're sharing. I often like to, reiterate the basic mission of Fulbright, the Fulbright program, and you learned a little bit earlier from your orientation about what the senator had in mind. And it was a pretty simple idea, but it's a profound one, and it is to increase mutual understanding between people of the U.S. and people of the world, and sort of reciprocal. And so that means, not only are you coming to learn this science and to connect with other similar-minded people, you're gaining a deeper appreciation of our culture and society, even that's in this remote place itself. But as I said earlier, you're also reflecting carefully on your own. You're becoming a more well-rounded person. So I'm pleased to hear the way you described how you've come to appreciate where you come from even more. You'll know what you miss, and your values will be reaffirmed, and things that you may have thought were very important, maybe they're not quite as important. I wonder, maybe as we're getting closer to the end of our opportunity to talk here, I mean, if you have any things you care to share by way of, again, observations about what you've come to learn about American culture and society. Again, we're in Hawaii, which is its own story, but you had a small window into Jackson, Mississippi. You had a brief trip earlier in the year to Phoenix, Arizona. But even beyond that, you're in the U.S. So you're part of this large country that we are part of. Stereotypes, perceptions, misperceptions, are there myths? Are they
So something that I often say when I'm dumbfounded at the size of things here is, this is Merca. This is Merca. We know what we want.
Size, yes.
So that's
and we are number one. We just reminded you yesterday, even though
sensitive subject.
Yes.
So yes, I think stereotypes of America does it big or they don't do it at all is true. They love cheese. Cheese is everywhere on everything.
Gosh.
And it's not even good cheese. I miss the dairy from home.
Yes.
But aside from that, I spent also 2 weeks in New York in August, and I was in the heart of the city for most of that, and it blew my mind, the size of that place and how fast people move.
Yes.
And people get used to living that quickly, but I could never do it. I could never do it, and that's another reason why I chose to come to Hawaii.
Yes.
But I just think that America likes to advance as much as possible, and they talk about this being the land of the free, and if you can work hard, you will get there. And I think, for the most part, that's true. So I admire that about American society. But I do wish sometimes that they thought a little bit more about sort of the roots and where things come from.
Yeah, no, I think, and your story has, I think, helped us underscore that. No matter where you're from, I mean, the more you understand that, where you're grounded, where you come from, why it matters to understand history, culture, people, it really helps to complete the picture. You're living not just in the future, but in the here and now, and understanding that you've come from somewhere. Well, this has been a great conversation, Kelly. I'm really grateful to have this opportunity to learn a lot from you, and for you to share some of your reflections, some of your thoughts. We have come out of time. At this point, we're going to have to wrap things up. I'm Carlos Juarez. This is the Global Connection Show in the ThinkTech radio series, and we've been joined today by Kelly Ratana, who comes from New Zealand, Aotearoa, down in the South Pacific, and basically a land that, while far from here, is very much connected to the Hawaiian Islands, of course, in many ways. The culture, and even the things in terms of how they look carefully at the land that they are also nurturing. And so I want to thank you all for joining us here. Thanks to our production manager, Ian, who helps make it possible as well, our communications director, Chrissy, Jay Fidel, who brings it all together. And I want to thank you, our listeners. ThinkTech will be back next week for our next show in the ThinkTech series. Please stay tuned again. And if you want to get any of our daily emails, our social media program advisories, click on the link at thinktechhawaii.com. If you'd like to be a guest, a sponsor, or even a ThinkTech underwriter, just write to jay@thinktechhawaii.com. Remember, we broadcast this live every day at 2 and at 4, and all of our shows are streamed on Ustream and at Spreaker.com. If you want links to those or looking at podcasts from past episodes, you can find them all at thinktechhawaii.com. And of course, I'll see you here next week on the next show, Global Connections. Aloha, everyone.